Hi, I'm Shelley Wood and this is my tiny sewing room where I make doll clothes sewing videos. Recently I showed you how to make this skirt, and today we'll be using the same pattern, but instead of using pre-gathered lace trim, we'll use the pattern to create our own ruffle for the same skirt. Throughout this tutorial video, you may see me working with either version of the skirt, but at the end we'll be adding the ruffle that you see on the brown version of the skirt. Before we begin, please go to my website, shellywood.com. to download and print this free PDF sewing pattern, including all the ruffle pieces. Tape the ruffle pieces together, end to end, where it says tape here. And that's what you see me doing right here. I just take the tape and tape it to the other tape. You want to make sure you line up the lines for where your hem will be. That's what I'm doing, is checking to see, okay, so there I have a notch, and over here I've got tape to tape, okay, and I've got it so you can go from one notch to the other. Use your skirt top section pattern to cut these 3 pieces of fabric, and this is really important. Note that if you're using a fabric which has a right side and a wrong side, make sure you cut out your pieces so that the swirl, okay, that sort of comma shape, is always going the same direction. Use your very long ruffle pattern to cut out a single ruffle piece. Lay one skirt top section on top of another, keeping right sides together. Sew from the top of the garment piece to just below that trapezoidal notch. Now I'm using a back stitch to sew my skirt, but of course you could use a sewing machine. Alright, so I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to back stitch by hand. Now of course you can use your sewing machine, but I chose to sew by hand because of the curl to this particular pattern. Now when we stitch from the notch area to the tip of the skirt, we'll bend the fabric to allow the curve like you see me doing in this next video clip. Okay, so I'm still back stitching by hand. I go past that trapezoidal notch, and as I move past the notch, I'm going to try to line up the cut edges of the skirt, and that's going to force a curl. As we get closer and closer to that pointy tip, I create a swirl effect with the fabric itself. Here's what I mean. Okay, so I have finished sewing past that trapezoidal notch, and I'm getting closer to the tip, and you can see where the fabric is starting to bend. The closer we get to the bottom pointy tip, the more the fabric swirls on its own, and that's what creates this swirly effect for the skirt. You just have to keep lining up the cut edge to the cut edge as you go. At the end of the pointy tip, you tie a knot. Now, if you need help tying a knot with needle and thread, I actually have a tutorial on that. It shows you how to do what's called a French knot. That's the type of knot I've used since I was a little kid. So it'll be in the description area below. Here's what your skirt should look like now. Since this is a curved seam, you're going to want to clip your seams, and I'll be using Fisker Stitcher's mini scissors. And if you need a pair, there is a link to these in the description area below. I love mine. They really help with clipping seams like this, especially when you're working with doll clothes. Your seams are so tiny, and it's just nice to have a very small pair of scissors to do this with. Next, we'll add the third skirt top section. Exactly like we did before, you'll want to start with the notches, keep right sides together, stitch from the top of the skirt to the end of the pointy tip. Once it's attached, it will look like this. Clip your seams. Once clipped, press all seams to the left. Now that we've sewn all three pieces together, we'll create a casing. It will help to use your pattern, which is marked with the fold lines. You're going to fold the top section of the skirt once, and then a second time using a deeper fold. Then you just use your pattern to guide where you fold, just like that, and then you'd fold a second time to match the casing depth, just like that. Whip stitch along the very bottom of the casing. If you need help with the whip stitch, I do have a tutorial for that. Just again, look in the description below this video on YouTube. It can help to pin your casing in place. Remove the straight pins as you sew along with the whip stitch. When you've finished your casing, measure your doll's waist for elastic, cutting it so there's only a slight overlap. Now this skirt will fit curvy as well, curvy dolls. 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch wide elastic is what I'm using. That's 3 to 6 millimeters if you're using the metric system. Attach a tiny safety pin to one end of the elastic and send the safety pin through the casing. Holding the elastic in place with straight pins on each side of the casing. Okay, so I send my safety pin through, and then I attach little straight pin that goes all the way through the elastic. You have to kind of test the elastic, give it a tug, and see if you got the straight pin to go all the way through. When you get to the other side, put the other straight pin in, and then you're free to remove the safety pin. Now your skirt will look something like this. Bring the two straight pins together with right sides together by folding the skirt in half, like you see me doing here. It's important in this step to remember that you don't remove those straight pins until you have sewn all the way through the elastic. So what we're going to do, we're going to attach this other swirl, but the key is right there. Make sure that your needle and thread go through the elastic. Sew from the casing down the side of the skirt, making sure your stitches pass all the way through the elastic before moving down the skirt to the pointy tip, just like we did twice before. Here's a closer look at my stitches. And this is my final side stitch, I guess you could call it, although it's a windy side stitch. Okay, and I'm using a back stitch here, and then I tie my knot. If you look inside the skirt, it's going to look something like this. But you'll want to keep your skirt wrong side out for the time being. Fold the rough edge of the skirt toward you, just like this, and straight stitch along this single folded hem. Okay, so to show you what I mean, you can look inside it and you see the right side, but we're going to stay on the wrong side, which is the part that would be inside the skirt. You're going to fold it toward you, and then you're going to stitch all along this single fold hem. I used my sewing machine for this step, but I have included a link to my hand stitching straight stitch sewing tutorial. Now we'll work with our ruffle piece. Fold the ruffle's hem once and then a second time using the pattern as a guide. Either whip stitch or use your sewing machine to hem the entire length of the ruffle. And I used a sewing machine, obviously. It's a really long ruffle. To ensure that you can attach the ruffle, I recommend using a very long stretch of thread to gather your ruffle. Now my thread was 16 inches, which is about 40.5 centimeters long. That's very long. Gather the raw edge of the ruffle fabric. If you need help with gathering, again, I do have a tutorial. Just look in the description below. When you get to the end of the gathered ruffle, do not tie off your gather thread. Instead, leave the gather thread attached. Turn your skirt right side out and pin the ruffle to the hem of the skirt. And this is my gather thread. So as I pin, I've still got that gather thread attached. Now when you get close to the end of the pinning, leave a little tail of ungathered ruffle, which we'll sew together at the very, very end. When the ruffle has been pinned, and your ruffles have been adjusted and maybe repinned, because usually you have to do some adjusting as needed, then you can tie off the gather thread, and that's why you leave that thread there. Now you're going to backstitch to attach the ruffle to the hem, sewing from the hem side, not the underside, and removing the straight pins as you sew. When you return to the starting point, bring the raw edges of the ruffle together and stitch them top to bottom. If there's any excess ruffle fabric, trim it off. Your skirt should now be ready to try on a doll. What a lovely ruffle! For more free printable PDF sewing patterns, for making doll clothes to fit dolls of many shapes and all different sizes, including the shirt pattern that goes with my skirt, please remember to visit my website, chellywood.com. I'd like to give a shout out to Lisa, who ran the Ian's bookstore and who inspired this beautiful Barbie skirt. It was so fun to work with Lisa. You can find a link to Lisa's online bookstore in the description below this video.